November 24, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve, Portland International Airport. A man, buying a one-way ticket, paid in cash, called himself Dan Cooper. He boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305, a Boeing 727, and somewhere between Seattle and Reno, he stepped into the night with $200,000 in $20 bills, and was never positively identified. That's the case we're digging into today.
Wow, the only unsolved case of commercial air piracy in U.S. history. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it still reads like a short film, doesn't it? But it's not fiction. It's all in FBI files, eyewitness accounts, and a few physical fragments that have kept the story alive and confusing for decades. Colin, can you start by telling listeners why the 727 matters in this story?
Yeah, Mara. The Boeing 727-100 had a feature most modern listeners probably don't know about, a rear air stair that could be lowered in flight. That design element, intended for small airport operations, is what made the escape possible. It's not just drama. The airplane's configuration, the choice to keep gear down and flaps at 15, and the requested speed and altitude were all part of a workable, if dangerous, jump profile.
Right. And to ground us, the man presented himself as a middle-aged businessman. Flight attendants and ticket agents described him as calm, polite, neatly dressed, dark suit, white shirt, thin black tie, black raincoat, brown shoes. He blended in, which is important. He didn't look dangerous, and that might have been the point.
Exactly. Eyewitness descriptions put him roughly mid-40s, about 5'10" to 6 foot, medium build. He carried a black attaché case and a brown paper bag, and even ordered a bourbon and 7-Up while the plane waited on the tarmac. Those are small human details that make the scene almost mundane, and that mundanity worked in his favor.
Mundane and terrifying at the same time. So here's one of my favorite little details from the files. He bought the ticket at about 2 p.m. at Portland, paid cash, and used the name Dan Cooper. The D.B. Cooper name? That stuck because of a press error. It's a misnomer born of journalism, and now it's legendary.
Yeah, the label stuck. And the FBI documents always reference the Dan Cooper name as the one used at the counter. But for popular culture, D.B. Cooper is the brand, if you will.
Let's move through the flight step by step. After takeoff, still a short hop, Portland to Seattle is about 30 minutes. Cooper handed a note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. She initially thought it was a phone number or a flirt, but he leaned in and said quietly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." He then opened his attaché slightly and showed her what looked like wires and red cylinders.
Right. To Schaffner, it looked real enough. Wires, red cylinders, and a battery. She had no training to determine if it was live or fake, and she acted under the assumption it was a genuine threat. That moment of quiet, more than the shouting or guns you'd expect, is what made the crew cooperate without any chaotic struggle.
He dictated his demands. $200,000 in $20 bills, 10,000 20s, and 4 parachutes, 2 mains and 2 reserves. The arithmetic alone is vivid. And the airline and the FBI scrambled to assemble the ransom bills, recorded by serial number. They also sourced parachutes from local civilian and skydiving sources. They tried to cover every contingency.
Yes, the 4 parachute demand is often interpreted as him wanting to ensure the chutes weren't sabotaged, like he could force someone to jump with him or he wanted spares. It forced the airline and FBI to take the threat seriously and treat the equipment and money with extreme care, which is how the serial numbers get recorded and why every bill became a potential piece of evidence.
That's an important point. The only reason any of the ransom bills can be linked back later is because of that recording. Those serial numbers are the thread the FBI followed when and if bills surfaced. Speaking of which, the crew and passengers were kept in the dark for most of this. There was no panic among passengers. The hijacking was handled quietly and methodically.
And that was part of Cooper's leverage. No alarm, no chaos, just control.
When the plane landed in Seattle around 5:46 p.m., he insisted they park on a dimly lit runway, avoid obvious police presence, and allowed all 36 passengers to deplane. He then accepted the money and the parachutes and kept only the pilots, the flight engineer, and one flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, on board for the second leg.
He specifically requested low speed, low altitude, 10,000 feet, about 170 knots, gear down, flaps 15, and an unpressurized cabin. Initially, he said Mexico City, but the pilots negotiated a more realistic plan with a refueling stop in Reno. This is where your expertise, Colin, is crucial. How feasible was that request?
From a performance standpoint, it's feasible. A 727 can fly at 10,000 feet with gear down and flaps set that way for low-speed stability. The requested speed, around 170 knots, is near the lower safe limit, and the crew would be mindful of stall margins. The pilots were accommodating yet cautious. They had to balance his demands and the safety of the aircraft. The configurations he requested matched what would be needed for a jump off the air stair, so he knew his way around aircraft behavior.
So, take off again from Seattle, now at 7:40 p.m., and the 727 was tailed by military jets. Pilots from McCord followed in patterns to stay out of sight. Sometime around 8:13 p.m., the cockpit warning light showed the rear air stair had deployed, and they felt the plane dip slightly. That's the conventional moment the FBI and most researchers mark as the jump. He vanished into the night.
The pursuing pilots reported nothing like a parachute seen in the sky. No canopy, no body. But that doesn't necessarily mean much. It was night, stormy weather, and the visibility was poor. The simplest explanation is that the jump occurred, and whatever happened after is the core mystery, survival or death.
Let's talk survival probabilities. The FBI leaned toward probably died. They highlight 3 central points: the parachute types, his clothing, and the environmental conditions. The mean chute in the pack was a military-style bailout chute that wasn't steerable, and one reserve parachute was a non-functional training reserve. He wore a business suit and loafers. It was night, cold, rainy, and the terrain below was rugged and forested.
Right. Also remember the psychological assumption the FBI made. A professional parachutist wouldn't elect to jump in those conditions. Night, rain, cold, with a non-steerable chute, wearing dress clothes. That suggested to them he likely perished. But there are counter-arguments. If he had military parachute training, he could have been prepared for rough conditions, and he clearly knew enough about the 727 and its air stair to plan the jump methodically.
He did seem to understand aircraft operations. He requested configurations that were functionally necessary for a jump. He checked the money and the chutes. He dimmed cabin lights. Some argue that indicates at least a working familiarity with planes. Still, the lack of solid remains. No body, no definitive clothing fragments, only a few ambiguous artifacts means the question splits in 2 directions.
If he died, it's an expert attempt that failed in the wilderness. If he survived, he somehow endured the landing, carried and concealed $200,000 in traceable bills, and slipped away. Both scenarios are plausible within the constraints of the evidence. That's the central tension.
Let's go through the physical evidence. After the plane arrived in Reno and the FBI swept it, they found a J.C. Penney clip-on tie on his seat, 2 hairs, and, famously, 8 Raleigh cigarette butts that were later lost or destroyed. 2 parachutes were left behind, 1 unused main chute and a reserve chute with cut shroud lines. Those parachute lines are a detail worth returning to.
Those cut shroud lines suggest improvisation, maybe to secure the money bag or modify gear. The main chute that was left behind later ended up on display in a museum. The tie analysis years later found microscopic particles, including titanium and bismuth, materials associated with aerospace and metal fabrication. That led some investigators to hypothesize Cooper might have worked around aerospace manufacturing, possibly Boeing, but that's circumstantial.
We should be careful here. The tie particles are suggestive but not conclusive. The FBI files included scanning electron microscopy results showing unusual particles, which could imply an industrial environment. But again, it doesn't identify a person. Still, it's one of the threads amateurs and professional sleuths have pulled on.
Another physical clue. In 1978, a deer hunter found an air stair instruction placard about 13 miles east of Castle Rock, Washington, consistent with the flight path theory. And then the most famous find, Tina Barr, 1980. A young boy found about $5,800 in deteriorated $20 bills with serial numbers matching the ransom list. That discovery proved at least some money ended up in the Columbia River.
That Tina Barr find is the scene stealer of physical clues. 3 rubber-banded bundles, chewed by time and water, but the serial numbers were a match. It showed that not all the money vanished without a trace, but it opened new questions. How did the money get there? Was it washed downstream from a landing site? Did Cooper intentionally bury or hide it? Or did someone else deposit or lose it? The river is a messy variable.
Exactly. The Columbia River's currents could carry a body or bundles for miles. Plus, the terrain was rugged. A body could be hidden, scavenged, or carried into deep water. The absence of other confirmed bills entering circulation, despite the FBI's serial number lists, is odd. You'd expect some to surface over time.
Which brings us to suspects. Hundreds were investigated. The 4 commonly discussed here are Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., Dwayne L. Weber, Robert Rackstraw, and Kenneth Peter Christensen. Let's take them one at a time. Colin, can you start with McCoy?
Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. is interesting because of method similarity. He hijacked a 727 in April 1972 and parachuted out the back with ransom money. He was a Vietnam veteran and trained parachutist. People saw parallels and suspected him, but the FBI ruled him out. Physical descriptions didn't match the Cooper eyewitnesses, and his alibi placed him elsewhere on Thanksgiving Eve. Forensics and timeline didn't align.
McCoy's later escape from prison and death in a shootout only fed myth, but the evidence against him being Cooper was substantial. Next, Dwayne Weber, an odd case. He died in 1995, and his widow later claimed he said on his deathbed, "I'm Dan Cooper." She also reported nightmares and odd confessions. But again, the FBI compared prints and DNA and didn't find a match. The Weber case leans heavily on anecdote.
Yes, and the burden of proof is high. Deathbed confessions are compelling in human terms, but not in forensic ones. The FBI's inability to tie Weber to the case through tangible evidence left that theory unproven. Then there's Robert Rackstraw, whom some documentary makers promoted heavily. He had relevant military and aviation background, but again, the FBI investigated and publicly stated he was ruled out.
Kenneth Christensen is interesting because he worked for Northwest and had flight experience and paratrooper background. That insider knowledge theoretically gives him the means. But flight attendant Tina Mucklow reportedly did not think he looked like Cooper, and forensic comparisons were inconclusive. It's a pattern. Each suspect explains pieces of the case, but never all the pieces. Colin, what do you make of that pattern?
It's telling. Real cases rarely have a single smoking gun, especially when the primary actor walked into an era of low security and left almost no records. Each suspect fits certain parts, skills, timeline, location, but lacks the definitive linkage, matching DNA, serial bills in possession, or eyewitness confirmation. The piecemeal nature of the evidence suits a mystery that resists closure.
It's frustrating as an investigator, but also why the story persists. Part of why it remained unsolved is the time period itself. 1971 airport security was minimal. No metal detectors, no required photo ID for a last-minute cash ticket, and cockpit doors not hardened. That made it easy for someone intent on slipping through.
Not to mention degraded evidence. The original note Cooper handed to Schaffner was taken back, so investigators never got that initial handwriting sample. The cigarette butts that might have yielded DNA were lost. The tie produced partial DNA decades later, but contamination and degradation made it useless. When a case starts with missing or compromised evidence, your long-term options narrow dramatically.
And then there's human error and conflicting calculations. Different analysts have mapped different jump zones because of imprecise navigation, wind data, and pilot recollections. That makes targeted searches almost impossible. If you don't know where to look, you search a vast, rugged area and find nothing. The FBI eventually declared the case inactive in 2016 after exhaustive review, not because it was solved, but because they'd run out of credible leads.
They called it NORJAC, Northwest Hijacking. Their public statement in 2016 said they'd reviewed credible leads and encouraged the public to submit any new physical evidence. It was more an administrative suspension of active inquiry than a definitive closure. They left the door open for new, tangible items.
Let's pause and reflect on how the case changed aviation security. D.B. Cooper's hijacking, whether the man survived or not, pushed airlines and regulators to rethink vulnerabilities. Metal detectors, baggage screening, and eventually the Cooper vane, a simple mechanical device to keep the 727's rear stairs locked in flight, are all part of the post-Cooper landscape. So in a way, the case had institutional impact, even as it left individuals in limbo.
Yes, the Cooper vane is an elegant technical fix, a small aerodynamic flap that prevents the air stair from being lowered while the aircraft is in flight. It's an example of engineering responding to a human exploit. Many security measures we take for granted trace back to breaches like this one.
We also have to talk about culture. The man who calmly took a plane, took the money, and vanished became an almost mythic figure. Songs, books, TV plot points, Cooper entered popular culture. But behind the legend are real people. The crew, the pilots like Bill Ratazacek, who later said he hoped Cooper was dead, given the trauma. For them, this wasn't romantic.
And that's an important human layer to remember. The crew experienced fear and moral responsibility. They were coerced into roles that put them at risk. Ratazacek and the other crew members carried that memory for the rest of their lives. For them, the case wasn't an intriguing puzzle. It was a professional nightmare with long echoes.
Let's get back to some of the debated technical points. People ask whether an experienced parachutist could have navigated a night jump with a military bailout chute. Colin, what can you tell us about the limitations of that chute type?
Military bailout chutes of that era were designed to open predictably on a straight-down pull. They often lacked the steering toggles of modern civilian sport parachutes. An experienced jumper could manage to some extent by controlling body position and choosing timing, but at night, in wind and rain, with a heavy money bundle and in dress shoes, a controlled landing is far from guaranteed. Survival is possible but complicated, and a non-steerable canopy greatly reduces the margin for selecting a safe landing zone.
And that reserve parachute in the pack turned out to be a sewn-shut training dummy, which the FBI interpreted as another sign that the hijacker might not have been an expert. But on the other hand, he had one main chute that opened, and a plan to cut lines, possibly to tie the money back. There's that tension again between competence and mistakes.
Right. Cutting shroud lines suggests improvisation or foresight for securing the bag. But taking a dummy reserve is puzzling, unless he intended it as a decoy or someone else packed the chutes under time pressure. We have to remember the FBI was assembling the chutes quickly, under pressure. Errors could come from them as well as from the hijacker.
Let's address alternate theories people float all the time, but only as far as our source material allows. Some suggest Cooper was a Boeing engineer, based on tie particles. Others say he was a military man because of his parachuting knowledge. We can point to those hypotheses, but none of them are conclusively proven by the evidence we've discussed.
Agreed. The tie's microscopic particles are suggestive of industrial exposure, possibly aerospace, but they're not a fingerprint. Military training explains skill sets, but doesn't explain the missing physical proofs.
And the Tina Bar money demonstrates at least partial river dispersal, but doesn't identify who lost or placed the bundles. So every plausible narrative has weak links. By the way, Mara, what about the way the FBI handled evidence, the cigarette butts being lost? How much did that handicap the investigation?
It handicapped it considerably. Those Raleigh filters might have contained epithelial cells or DNA traces that, with today's technology, could have been compared to suspects and databases. The loss or destruction of such potentially crucial items is tragic in cases like this. It's a reminder. In the early 1970s, the protocols for preserving trace evidence weren't what they are now.
And yet, the FBI did preserve things like the tie and the parachute, which later allowed for some forensic testing. But by the time techniques improved, contamination and degradation reduced usefulness. It's a common problem in cold cases.
Let's imagine, hypothetically, that Cooper survived. He would have had to do several things: land safely in horrible conditions, shed obvious traces, launder or hide thousands of identifiable notes, and live quietly without attracting suspicion. Does that narrative hold up realistically?
It's not impossible, but it requires a combination of luck, planning, and discipline. He could have buried the money or hidden it locally, or he might have exchanged it in a way that avoided detection. The fact that only a small percentage, the Tina Bar money, turned up suggests secrecy, or that most bills were never recovered, but it remains speculative. From an aviation technical perspective, the jump could be executed. From a post-jump logistics standpoint, escaping untraced with $200,000 is very difficult long-term.
On the other hand, if he died and his body was never found, that would also make sense because of the terrain and weather. The wilderness, rivers, and scavenging animals can erase traces quickly. The lack of remains is not definitive proof of survival or death.
Exactly. The environment is an active variable. Rivers carry, soils bury, and in 1971, search techniques were limited. Add to that the uncertainty in pinpointing the jump location, and you have an enormous search area for little initial direction.
I see.
Mara, quick thought. People often ask whether any of the ransom bills turned up in banks, or whether anyone ever tried to spend them. What does the evidence say?
Very few confirmed bills ever surfaced in circulation. The FBI distributed lists of serial numbers to banks, casinos, racetracks, and big businesses, hoping one would show up. Aside from the Tina Bar discovery, there were almost no confirmed hits linked to the ransom in normal transactions. That's unusual and fuels speculation that the money was hidden rather than spent casually.
That's right. If someone had tried to launder large portions into commerce, you'd expect more hits. Unless they used cash exchanges in informal markets or laundered it through untraceable means.
We're circling back to the same conclusion. Pieces of the puzzle, but no conclusive whole. Before we wrap, let's address why this case continues to fascinate the public. Is it the audacity, the missing ending, the small human moments, or some combination?
All of the above. The audacity of the act, calm, polite, and gone, is compelling. The missing ending invites participation. Amateur sleuths, authors, and filmmakers can propose theories that people debate. And the human moments, a flight attendant handing a note across an aisle, a boy finding money on a riverbank, make the story emotionally resonant. It's part mystery, part cultural Rorschach.
Cultural Rorschach. I like that. It also reminds us that cold cases persist when the evidence is ambiguous. The FBI closed active investigation in 2016 because they'd exhausted credible leads, not because the case was solved. They left it technically open for new physical evidence.
And that's an important nuance, suspended, not solved. New material evidence, a stash of bills with serial numbers, a parachute component with unique marks, or some other physical artifact could prompt renewed inquiry. But after more than 4 decades, the odds of a clear breakthrough dim with time.
So where does that leave us? For the public, it leaves a narrative that resists tidy closure.
For the aviation industry, it left a legacy of practical fixers. For the families and crew involved, it left long memories. Colin, one last technical question. Do you think, given all we know, that a man like Cooper could have disappeared cleanly in the Pacific Northwest in 1971?
Could he have disappeared? Yes, but it's a narrow path requiring either an unfortunate death that left no recoverable trace or an extraordinary combination of parachuting proficiency, local knowledge, and operational discipline to conceal the money and his identity. Both outcomes are plausible, but neither is proven by the existing evidence. The case sits between plausibility and uncertainty.
That's the tension that keeps it alive. Before we go, let's remind listeners of the concrete, verifiable points. November 24, 1971, PDX to SEA, Boeing 727, $200,000 in $20 bills, the rear air stair, the 8:13 p.m. air stair alert, the Tina Bar money, the Thai particulate analysis, and the 2016 suspension of the case. Those are the anchors. Everything else is interpretation around them.
Agreed. Anchor facts, those are what we can rely on. The rest is careful theorizing.
Okay, quick rapid-fire wrap. Colin, name one myth about Cooper you wish people would stop repeating.
That the FBI botched the case beyond any reasonable repair. They did make mistakes, particularly by modern standards, but they also collected a huge archive of investigative work and preserved key items. It's complicated.
My turn. The romanticized idea that Cooper was a folk hero who beat the system. Stop. He endangered people, traumatized crew members, and forced an ugly, dangerous improvisation. It's not a Robin Hood story.
Yeah, not a hero, not a vacation. It was coercion and terror, even without bloodshed.
All right. If you like cases where the forensic paper trail is thin, but the human story is vivid, subscribe. We'll keep digging into mysteries like this on Still Unanswered. Colin, final words?
If you love technical puzzles and human stories, stay curious but skeptical. The Cooper case rewards both. And if anyone finds cold packs of $20 with matching cereals, please call the FBI. Seriously.
That's the most practical take. Thanks, Colin, and thank you for listening. I'm Mara Ellison. This is Still Unanswered.
I'm Dr. Colin Reyes. Stay safe and keep asking questions.
If you want sources and a deeper timeline, check the FBI's official summary, the extensive D.B. Cooper pages on Wikipedia, the time coverage of the 2016 closure, and the People magazine pieces on Thai forensics. We'll link to those in the episode notes. See you next time.